Hi again then guys, and welcome to another instalment of Beards and Cars. This is my podcast style series. As you can see from the time of the video, a much longer form layout where we can really get into discussions, predictions, countdowns, and community topics as well. And this was one of those. It was something which I hadn't heard of because although, as many of you know, I do love Le Mans, it's my favourite motorsport event, but I don't follow current Le Mans rules, because it just doesn't interest me as much. I think my love for Le Mans kind of ended in the early 2000s, really, with the LMP 900 era. I like a couple of the LMP ones, but once the cars really started getting so similar, it's basically meaningless, I lost interest. Because, of course, once you get up around, say, 2006, 2007, you start to just get Audi's dominance, and then hybrids and diesels become more of the thing, and now the cars are so similar that I don't support any of the teams. Just like with Formula cars, that's why I'm not interested in them either. It's almost like a grid full of the same thing that's just in a different colour with a different driver. And I'm sure that appeals to some people, like Formula E for instance, but since I'm not interested in drivers at all and I don't support teams arbitrarily, I support them because of their innovation, well, by definition, this kills innovation from individual teams because the innovations that they have are so small and minuscule that although, yes, it can give them a victory, like the slight differences in aero that Formula teams will employ, that doesn't interest me enough. I like the broad strokes. I like it when teams can use their background, use their own creativity, harness what they are known for. Because let's be honest, at the end of the day, it's all a big marketing scheme. That's what racing is. It's about teams showing off what they can do to make people want to buy the road car. And then you have the smaller privateer teams like Pluskota and various others who don't have a road car, and they do it more purely for the competition, but still to some degree as advertising. So with these rule changes that are coming, as you saw from the title and the thumbnail, which incidentally you can read on autosport.com, these changes were highlighted to me by a member of the community when I asked for some subjects and topics which you guys would like to discuss in Beards and Cars. And because of the fact that I don't follow current LMP1 really at all, I just note down whoever won and that's about it, I wasn't aware of this change, and it's a pretty drastic one, or at least it could initially seem to be. And that is that the FIA has confirmed that for the 2020/2021 rule years, LMP1 as we know it is not going to be around anymore. There will be no more LMP1 cars in Le Mans because it is becoming a so-called hypercar class. Now that could sound cool, or it might not, depending on what you think of that. Part of me thinks, it's cool, potentially, on the surface. Hypercar, what do we think of with hypercar? Well, you think of stuff like LaFerraris, Koenigsegg's, Hennessy Venoms, but at the same time, you immediately know that's not what they're talking about. There's no way you're going to get a Hennessy Venom GT1 car going up against a Koenigsegg GT1, as cool as that would be. So what do they mean? Well, it turns out that it's not as exciting as it sounds, let's be honest, because yes, LMP1 is going away, and it's being replaced by this so-called hypercar class, which is under the working title of GTP, which of course we've definitely heard of before, but what it actually means isn't as interesting or as taboo or controversial as you might think, because the cars are still underneath going to be technically custom-built prototypes for Le Mans, so that isn't really going to change. The biggest thing that's changing as far as the design is that individual teams will be able to, under these new regulations, have a varying amount of creativity as far as applying their road-going looks to their car, which sounds eerily reminiscent of silhouette Formula racing, like the R30 Skyline Formula silhouette car that was in Gran Turismo 2, the red and black one, which is a fan favourite, but that's from a number of years ago. So to hear this kind of mentality returning, it both encourages me and I also don't like it for different reasons. Now, the reasons why I like it is because, of course, I like it when cars look different. And that's something which I'm really glad GT racing still does. You know, the Aston looks different to the Ford GT, looks different to the Corvette, looks different to the Ferrari. They are all genuinely different looking cars, and they feel different. That's what I like to see. Whereas with the prototypes, the Toyota, the Porsche, the Audi, they look so similar now that I don't really care who wins. And I know people support various teams, but for me, for instance, the reason why I support Panos as my favourite racing team is not because of just some arbitrary love for a badge. It's because of their innovation. Panos developed the Delta Wing before Nissan tried to steal it. They developed the Sparky GTR1 hybrid, which was the first Le Mans hybrid ever. They developed one of my favourite modern prototypes, the front mid-engine Panos LMP1 Roadster. They're a team that I love because they're not scared to try things that are different, and although they don't necessarily win all the time, they have some pretty impressive results. That's why I love Panos. They're forward-thinking, they're oddball, they dare to be different, but they're not just different for the sake of it, they're good at it. So nowadays, that's why it doesn't interest me as much. You know, Porsche has a slightly different aero setup, Toyota has a slightly different gearbox setup, Audi has a slightly different engine. I don't really care. It just doesn't interest me anymore. And it's not because it's Toyota, Audi and Porsche. If Panos was making them as well, I'd support it because I support Panos, but I wouldn't support the car itself, because by definition it would have to fall under the same rules. So with these rule changes, the thing that I do like is the fact that they will potentially look more different. You could have, for instance, something that's kind of a prototype underneath, but which looks like a LaFerrari FXXK, or, you know, a Corvette Daytona prototype kind of shape with the mid-engine layout. That's a cool concept, but that brings me to what I don't like. Now, as far as the meeting around these rules, the official quote from the FIA is that they will be allowed freedom of design based on a hypercar concept. That's the official quote directly from them. Now, the teams who are there for the meeting are very interesting, because there are 5 of them, and yet only one of those 5 have any involvement in LMP1 to begin with, and they were McLaren, Ford, Toyota, Ferrari, and Aston Martin. Those are not LMP1 teams, so they're not talking to Porsche, they're not talking to Audi, and although they're talking to Toyota, Toyota's kind of always had their foot in a little bit of both camps, running GT racing and prototypes, whereas Aston, they haven't been in LMP1 for years. McLaren has never been in LMP1. Of course, Ford has had a couple of outings with the Courage C65, but that's a number of years ago. So this is a very interesting group of teams to have involved. Very much so a GT-style team arrangement, rather than, for instance, Pasquarolo, Courage, Zytek, Riley, these kind of manufacturers and smaller privateers who do have a number of years in prototype racing, top-tier prototype racing. So what then does that mean for the mechanicals? Because if it's basically just a new rule change to allow skins to be changed on cars, then what does it mean for the performance side of things? Because obviously that's going to significantly change the kind of aerodynamic signature that these cars will have. Well, as far as specific engines and stuff like that, I wasn't able to find any real specific stuff for that, but some of the changes that are coming mechanically are ones which I personally am not a huge fan of. Because for one thing, hybridization of these top-tier race cars is going to be carried over. They will still be hybrids. But here's the part that I don't like. It would appear that the FIA's intentions are to remove each team developing their own hybrid system and offering instead a standardized hybrid unit that any of the teams can have fitted, and most likely will have to have fitted. Now, that makes sense from a competition point of view, or at least modern competition, where it in effect levels the playing field. But at the same time, that's why I don't like it. The whole point of racing, or the whole point of racing in the past, from not the marketing point of view, but from the guys who are actually in the pits doing the work, has always been to support that team's innovation, to put their spin on it. Whereas this, by definition, culls that. There is no individual definition of a team because it's a standardized, genericized unit that they'll all have to use. That is such a boring idea to me. Now, I understand why they're doing it, and one of the main reasons is always money. And officially, one of the big reasons is money, because the FIA have said that they want the performance level of these top-tier hypercars to be similar to current LMP1, but at 1/4 of the costs for the teams involved. Now that's cool, but at the same time, racing by definition is going to be expensive, so complaining about the costs seems like a weird idea. Now, I'm not saying that the teams asked them to change this, but having costs as your number one priority is a fool's errand in the racing world, because anyone who's ever worked on their own race car or a project car knows that it's a money pit by definition. So to try and cut these rule books, or the corners of rule books, to save a dime here and there, 25% is significant, but still, the whole concept of trying to save money in the racing world, it's just weird to me, because saving money on something which still has to maintain the same level of performance is a very dangerous idea. Just like it would be if you tried to make a $100 million movie on a $25 million budget. By definition, you're going to have to cut some things away, so the finished product is going to be very difficult to look the same. Now, if you get the right director on that movie, you can still make it look great, but there will be differences. Likewise with this, there are going to be differences. Now, of course, where it moves on from just LMP1 in terms of its potential change is LMP2 and LMP3. How are they going to be affected? Well, LMP2 homologation rules will still allow them to run in 2020, 2021. So we'll have to see if they try to change that, but it would appear, for the moment at least, the LMP2s could still run, and maybe LMP3s will become kind of more of the ideal to maybe replace LMP2 at some point. Because initially, when this hypercar class first rolls out, there could potentially be some issues of, especially in the early development stages of this new idea, these hypercars being slightly slower than prototype or P1s were for top-end speed. So the LMP2s could actually end up being maybe just as fast or a little bit quicker, which of course will be kind of weird when that's supposed to be the top-tier category. So we'll have to see how that works, but it would seem that for the moment LMP2 and or LMP3 is not experiencing these huge changes, it's just LMP1. But at the same time, having a grid that consists of GT, LM, and then, or LMP, and then hypercar, that's kind of a weird setup. It's an interesting one, but it's a weird one still. Now, as far as my overall thoughts on this, I like it and I dislike it. I like that they're trying something new, although the impetus is very clearly marketing based, of course. Just like with Group C, as I said with the others, the teams want their cars to be advertising their road-going brand, because at the end of the day, sponsors make money, but they don't make anywhere near as money as selling cars do. So, of course, as I said, the whole point of racing is a combination of showing off and selling stuff. So those two combined is a powerful tool, and that's why, of course, if you check out the, for instance, sales report of Audi before they developed a diesel Le Mans car, and then check the sales report of their diesel road cars after they started winning, I guarantee you'll notice a significant difference. And of course, that's what it all boils down to for most, if not all, of these much, much bigger teams. And then the smaller, more privateer teams tend to be more like just the passion project kind of guys who just want to race and want to win. And I think that the spirit of those smaller teams is much easier for most of us to get behind, because we can identify with that, whereas it's hard to identify with a big faceless corporation. You could support them still, but you've got to admit that their goals are very different to these smaller teams. So I'd say that my overall thoughts on this are, it's an interesting next chapter, and it's one which, of course, I'll have to reserve my final thoughts on when it actually happens and when we actually see what they're going to do, what the cars are going to look like, how they perform, how they do interact, and if this new hypercar class allows for the creativity not just in terms of looks, but in terms of, for instance, engine choice as well, to make it like GT cars, which have to run to the same regulations but can go about it in different ways to some degree, then I will have more interest in it than current LMP1. I still won't like it as much as LMP900, GT1 or Group C, but still, it will be more interesting to me than what we currently have. If, however, what happens is what I think will happen, which is essentially just like Formula 1 but with different skins, then I'll have even less interest in it than I currently do. It wouldn't surprise me if it goes that way, but that's basically the overview, the gist of what you need to know if you haven't heard of this change. I certainly hadn't heard of it, so I'm appreciative to the community member who did suggest this as a topic, and it's one which is interesting. Either way, if you like it, if you dislike it, it's an interesting discussion to have, it's an interesting change to the Le Mans, and it's one which we'll have to see how it plays out. So of course, I'd love to hear your thoughts down below on this, and of course I'm always open to having suggestions of topics, countdowns, discussions, predictions even. And it could be in the gaming world, the YouTube world, the racing world, pretty much anything. But that's it for this installment overall. You can click here on screen to see previous episodes of Beards and Cars. And for now, as always, thanks for watching.